some refreshing Mountain Dew. What's shaking booktube? My name's Cam, welcome back to another video. Today I'm talking about some of the books I read in January so far for the year. And, well, specifically focusing on the ones that were not good. Well, you know, actually, that's not exactly right. Just some books that didn't really rate very highly for me. And then I'm also going to talk about my TBR going forward, what I've got planned to read during February. If you've watched my channel for a while, you'll know that I've never been much in the habit of doing wrap-ups and TBRs on a monthly basis, that sort of thing, but I'm gonna try to do that. But then at the same time, if I don't get it done for a particular month, I'm not gonna be that phased, but I'll give it a shot just so I can keep you up to date with the books I'm getting through, because it is booktube. Obviously! So the two books that I want to talk about that I'm wrapping up today aren't the only books I read in January, but they are two that I wasn't particularly, let's say I was expecting a lot more. I read two others as well that you might have seen me already talk about on Goodreads, but I'm going to talk about those in a separate video because one of those in particular I want to have a bit of a longer chat about, longer than I could allow in this video. These two books I listen to by audiobook, which is something I do quite consistently because my full-time job involves me doing case management at a computer, and we're allowed to listen to music or audiobooks as we work. So I managed to get through at least maybe 3 to 4 hours of audiobook a day. The first book was highly and consistently recommended to me by my good friend G or Gintare from Book Roast, which is a channel I'm sure you're more than familiar with. She's kind of blown up recently, so congrats, G. No salt here, oh boy, haha. Nah, genuinely, I am super stoked for her. So if you don't know about G or Book Roast, please go check her out. She's fantastic. G recommended to me for quite a while this book called Lightningstruck Hot, and she mentioned to listen to it by audiobook. So naturally, I added it to my list and waited about 6 months before I actually did that. Organization is key, but I finally got around to listening to it at the start of January. It was highly recommended by her. Looking at the reviews, they were overwhelmingly positive, and I DNF'd it. Yeah, I have to say I didn't like it at all. I mean, it was a very strong start, don't get me wrong. It was it checked off a lot of boxes for me. As it's a comedy book, so it's almost satirical, but it still tries to hold a solid and original plot. For example, it develops its own kind of magic for the story, but it is satirical, it's comedy, it takes the piss out of the fantasy genre in general. And it focuses around, and try not to sound intrigued when I tell you this, but it focuses around the protagonist, who, from my understanding, is a young gay man, mind you, which I mentioned because it is a large part of the story itself. And then he had his sidekick, or his best friend, is a gay unicorn that shits rainbows and frequently discusses his sexual escapades. And the book kind of opens with them captured by a villain, and the dialogue exchange between the villain and the protagonist and the gay unicorn, Gary the unicorn, is hilarious. It had me in stitches, honestly. It was just good. It was very, very, how do I put it? It was somewhat realistic in what would happen if people were in that situation, and then it was always meta and made a lot of statements about the genre itself. For example, it in the first few pages it made fun of the villain doing a dialogue or a monologue explaining their evil plan before they kill the heroes. It took the piss out of that, and it was funny. I loved it. So at the very start I was assuming this was going to be one of my new favorites. I love comedy books, I love the fantasy genre, and I love books that take the piss out of things. Here's the thing though, as the book went on, and I think I ended up giving the book ultimately 2 stars, which translates to it was okay. I'll take a quick moment to explain how my rating system goes. So I do my rating system exactly as Goodreads gives it to you, which not much people adhere to just because it's kind of some would see it as off balance, but basically 1 star is it was bad, 2 stars is it was okay. Normally 2 stars would be considered a bad book as well, but 2 stars is it was okay. 3 stars is I liked it. 4 stars is it was excellent or something like that, and 5 stars is like this book is perfection. If we were to put it on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say 1 star is like 1 to 3 out of 10, 2 stars is 4 to 5 out of 10, you know, just average. 3 stars is 6 to 7, and 4 stars, that's 3 stars, 4 stars is 8, 9, and 5 stars is 10. Perfection. Yeah, absolute pinnacle. But yeah, anyway, I gave this book 2 stars because I don't necessarily see it as a bad book, but there are a lot of things about this book that I just didn't enjoy. I mean, obviously it should be considered a good book to a certain extent due to the overwhelming support for the book. But here's where my problems came in. So as the story goes on, the protagonist goes back to their city or their kingdom, and this is where a very big chunk of the next part of the story takes place. This is where the story took place right up until where I DNF'd it. I'm talking about 3 hours of audiobook took place at this kingdom, and almost every character that you were introduced to was introduced on a scale of how much the protagonist would fuck this person or not. The only exceptions being his own parents or older people in general, like the wizard who trains him, because he's a wizard's apprentice. And this is where it went from just being a silly satire of fantasy to just a book about a guy walking through a kingdom obsessing about how much he wants to lick this knight's balls. And like, you know, the first couple of times I laughed. It was hilarious. It was kind of jarring to see this in a fantasy book, and I loved that. But after a while, like any book that relies on over-sexualization for the sake of comedy, it just got stale and it got boring. And, you know, I tried to hang in there for a while, but 3 hours went by and I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't listen to... It was just hormones incarnate. It was just constant talk of dick bulges and like blowjobs and all this shit that I'm cool with. I think that's fucking hilarious in books, but I need a story too. There was no plot. The biggest problem of all is that in those 3 hours, there was no major plot laid down. There was no groundwork for any major plot. I had no idea where this story was actually going. After, you know, nearly 4 hours, all of the characters were in the exact same situation they were 4 hours ago, 3 to 4 hours ago. Nothing really changed except for exchanges between the characters that was almost entirely about sex. It just got boring, that's it. I'm not a PC person. I think talking about all that kind of crude shit in books is fantastic. I think it's a good way to shake the audience and really jar people, but you can't rely on that to be the punchline for every joke. Anyway, I talked way too long about that book. That's why I didn't like Lightningstruck Hot. The next one was Neil deGrasse Tyson's Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. I'll just make this quick because the book was actually quite good. It was a good book. As far as astrophysics goes, this is the easiest way to consume it. My main problem was just that I don't really think this is a good book, or especially audiobook, for people that are in a hurry. And that's due to what I guess is an unavoidable fact that you just cannot make astrophysics easy enough to the point where you can focus on doing other things while you listen to this audiobook. I just don't think it's personal unless you already have a basic understanding of those things. If you're coming in as a newbie to astrophysics, luckily I've already read a couple of books on this subject matter, so not all of it went over my head, but I still missed quite a lot because I was assuming I could listen to this book while I did other things, and it's just, you just can't. And it's fair enough because it's incredibly dense information and it covers everything. And as a plus, I would say Neil deGrasse Tyson, who narrated the book as well, which was fantastic, he did try to make it more consumable with metaphors and dad jokes. But at the end of the day, it is a book about astrophysics, and I think you're better off just buying the book and treating it as what it is. The audiobook, just being honest, is the equivalent of a university lecture. Neil deGrasse Tyson has an awesome voice, but when you couple the bassy, smooth tone of his voice with something as factually dense as astrophysics, it turns into a bit of a snooze fest. I don't know, I just wouldn't recommend this to people who plan on doing this while they do other things. That's all. But I did like it, so I gave it 3 stars. That's all I wanted to mention on those 2 books that I read or listened to in January. Now I want to tell you about my TBR, and I probably will read more books than these ones I'm about to mention in February, but for now I just want to keep it to this. And the first one is Strange Weather, or Stranger Weather by Joe Hill. I'm on a bit of a Joe Hill readathon right now. It was unplanned. I read Heart-Shaped Box, and I absolutely fell in love with that book. I'll be doing a separate video on that, but yeah, I loved it. So I'm on a bit of a Joe Hill binge right now. So I want to get through his short stories. I love short stories, and I would love to see how his compare to his father's, Stephen King. In case you haven't heard of him, Stephen King who, right? But yeah, Stranger Weather, Joe Hill. I'm looking forward to that one. Straight after that, in keeping in the vein of short stories, all the books on my TBR at this point are books of short stories, but keeping to the vein of Stephen King as well, is I will be reading Everything's Eventual, which is a collection of short stories by Stephen King. Technically it's a reread, but then it's also not, because the first thing I ever read by Stephen King was 1408, which is also a movie, if you don't know, the John Cusack movie. Fucking brilliant movie. But that was the first thing I ever read by Stephen King, and it remains to this day my favorite thing by him, so I thought, I'll reread that. And then when I went back to look for it, I realized it's actually a short story in a book of short stories called Everything's Eventual, so I'm gonna read that whole book. I haven't read the other short stories in that one yet. And then last but not least is the Essential Stories of H.P. Lovecraft. I picked up this book a million years ago, put it in the shelf and completely forgot about it, but I figure it's time to read it. Like I said, I'm probably going to read more books than the ones I've mentioned here, because mainly these are just short stories and I'm going to blast through them, but this is where I'm at right now. H.P. Lovecraft, if I remember right, unless I'm getting my authors mixed up, but I'm pretty damn sure it's H.P. Lovecraft. Tragic story, he died actually thinking he was a failure, so when he died his stories had no popularity whatsoever, and then he became a cult favorite after he passed away, which is pretty sad. But if there's anything you'll know H.P. Lovecraft for, it's Cthulhu. That's his creation. He kind of specializes in horror, that sort of thing as well, so I guess all of the books I have in this TBR are actually quite similar to each other. They're all horror or thriller, spook-based short stories. As always, thanks for watching, guys. Let me know what you're reading or what you have read this year already down below in the comments, and let's have a chat about it. Let me know what you think of Joe Hill, actually. I think I actually am starting to... I think I'm starting to enjoy Joe Hill more than I have ever enjoyed Stephen King. I believe he's my favorite. I can see myself quickly blasting through his entire catalogue of books and stories. I've become quite obsessed at the moment. Anyway, that's it. Do the thing if you want to. Do the thing. Follow me on the thing, and I'll see you in the next video. Catcha.